The sun was setting over the quiet suburban streets, casting long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns and parked cars. Officer Karen Dawson sat in her patrol car, sipping coffee from a travel mug as she scanned the area. It had been a slow day, just the way she liked it. But then, something caught her eye in the rearview mirror. A sleek black luxury sedan glided past her, its tires humming softly against the asphalt. The car looked out of place in this neighborhood, where most people drove minivans or compact sedans. Karen frowned slightly. Her gut told her something wasn't right. She watched as the car slowed down at a stop sign, but didn't come to a complete halt before turning onto another street. That was all the excuse she needed. Flipping on her sirens, she pulled out behind the vehicle and signaled for it to stop. As the driver eased the car to the curb, Karen grabbed her clipboard and stepped out of her patrol car, her boots clicking against the pavement. The man who emerged from the sedan was tall and well-dressed, wearing a crisp suit that looked expensive. He had a calm demeanor, his hands raised slightly in compliance as he waited for Karen to approach. "Good evening, officer," he said politely, his voice steady. "Is there a problem?" Karen ignored his question, focusing instead on the details around her. His car gleamed under the fading sunlight, every inch of it pristine. To her, it seemed too perfect, almost suspicious. She glanced at him again, taking note of his skin tone, and trying not to let her assumptions cloud her judgment. But deep down, they already were. "License and registration, please," she said sharply, her tone colder than necessary. Marcus nodded without argument, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. As he did so, Karen's eyes narrowed. Why was he so relaxed? Shouldn't he be nervous if he'd done nothing wrong? "I'm happy to provide those," Marcus replied, his tone still friendly despite Karen's hostility. "But may I ask why I was pulled over?" "You rolled through that stop sign back there," Karen snapped, pointing vaguely in the direction they'd come from. "And frankly, your vehicle stands out in this neighborhood." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't challenge her explanation. Instead, he handed over his documents with a small smile. "Understood. Here you go." As Karen flipped through the papers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Everything about him, from his polite responses to the high-end car, seemed calculated, like he was hiding something. Her frustration grew when she realized she couldn't find any fault in his paperwork. Still, she pressed on, peppering him with questions about where he was coming from and where he was headed. Marcus answered each one patiently, though his politeness began to feel more like mockery to Karen. Her grip tightened on her clipboard as irritation bubbled inside her. This wasn't how things usually went. People got defensive or nervous during traffic stops. Not cool and collected like this man. Was he playing games with her? When Marcus gently reminded her that she hadn't cited a clear reason for pulling him over, Karen felt her control slipping. Her face flushed, and her voice rose slightly as she accused him of having an attitude. The tension between them thickened, drawing curious stares from passing drivers. What started as a routine stop was quickly spiraling into something far more volatile, and neither of them could see where it would lead next. Karen's frustration reached a boiling point as she stared at Marcus, her mind racing with suspicion. She couldn't understand why he wasn't reacting the way people usually did during traffic stops, nervous, apologetic, or even angry. Instead, he stood there calmly, his hands visible, answering her questions without raising his voice. To Karen, his composure felt like defiance, though she couldn't quite explain why. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. Marcus hesitated for a split second, then complied, his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his hands raised slightly, ensuring she could see them at all times. Despite his cooperation, Karen's unease only grew. In her mind, every action he took was suspect, every gesture a potential threat. As Marcus stood beside his car, Karen began reciting the same instructions she always gave during stops like this. "Keep your hands where I can see them." But when Marcus reached into his pocket to retrieve his license, a document she had explicitly asked for, something inside Karen snapped. Her training told her to stay calm, but her instincts screamed that this was dangerous. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the arm and shoving him hard against the hood of his car. The sound of his body hitting the metal echoed through the quiet street. Marcus winced but didn't resist, knowing that any sudden movement could escalate the situation further. "Officer," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the force used against him. "I'm just getting my license. You told me to." But Karen wasn't listening. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, clouding her judgment. She barked commands at him, accusing him of making a threatening move. Passers-by slowed their cars, some rolling down their windows to watch what was happening. One woman pulled out her phone and began recording, capturing the scene in sharp detail. The flash of a camera phone caught Karen's attention, but she ignored it, too focused on maintaining control of the situation, or so she thought. Marcus repeated himself, calmly explaining that he was following her instructions. "I'm not resisting," he said, his voice measured. "You asked for my license, and I'm giving it to you." His words seemed to pierce through Karen's haze for a moment, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. By now, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, murmuring among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered about calling additional authorities. Karen glanced around, suddenly aware of how public this confrontation had become. Her face flushed with embarrassment, though she masked it with anger. She grabbed Marcus's license from his hand and stepped back, putting distance between them. For a few tense seconds, neither of them moved. Marcus straightened his suit jacket, brushing off invisible dust, his expression unreadable. Karen, meanwhile, fumbled with her clipboard, trying to regain her composure. She knew she'd overreacted, but admitting it wasn't an option. Not here, not now. Instead, she scribbled hastily on her citation pad, issuing a ticket for the minor traffic violation that had started this whole ordeal. As Marcus accepted the ticket, his eyes met hers briefly. There was no malice in his gaze, only disappointment. He nodded politely, got back into his car, and drove away, leaving Karen standing alone on the curb. It wasn't until after he was gone that she noticed something lying on the ground near where they'd been standing, a business card. Picking it up, she read the bold letters printed across it. Marcus Thompson, CEO of Diamond Tech Industries. Her stomach dropped. Suddenly, the luxury car, the expensive suit, and his unshakable poise made sense. This wasn't just some random driver. This was someone important. Someone who could make her life very difficult if he chose to. As Karen stared at the card, dread settled in her chest. For the first time, she realized that her actions might have consequences far beyond this quiet suburban street, and there was nothing she could do to take them back. The fallout from the incident spread like ripples in a pond, touching everyone it reached. At the precinct, Karen became a pariah among her colleagues. Those who had once shared jokes with her now avoided eye contact, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Some officers defended her, arguing that policing was a high-pressure job where split-second decisions could be misinterpreted. Others, however, saw the video as undeniable proof of misconduct, shaking their heads in disappointment. For Karen, each day felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, and everything could explode. Public reaction was even more unforgiving. The leaked video sparked outrage online, with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus trending across social media platforms. People shared stories of similar encounters with law enforcement, painting Karen's actions as part of a larger pattern of systemic bias. News outlets picked up the story, airing segments that dissected every detail of the traffic stop. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs demanding accountability and reform. Through it all, Karen remained silent, unsure of what to say or how to defend herself without digging the hole deeper. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself at the center of an unexpected storm. Friends and colleagues urged him to press charges, insisting that doing so would send a powerful message about racial injustice. "This isn't just about you," one of his closest advisors told him during a private meeting. "It's about standing up for everyone who's been treated this way." But Marcus hesitated. He understood the weight of the moment, but also believed punishment alone wouldn't solve the root problem. "I don't want revenge," he explained calmly. "What happened to me wasn't right, but I think there's value in teaching people to do better. If Officer Dawson is willing to learn, maybe we can turn this into something positive." His decision not to pursue legal action surprised many, drawing both praise and criticism. Supporters admired his grace and focus on education over retribution, while critics accused him of being too soft. Despite the mixed reactions, Marcus stood firm in his belief that meaningful change required compassion and understanding, not just consequences. Back at the precinct, Internal Affairs wrapped up their investigation, delivering a report that painted a damning picture of Karen's conduct. Her superiors called her into a meeting, where they outlined the findings: excessive use of force, failure to follow protocol, and behavior inconsistent with department values. While termination loomed as a possibility, they offered her a choice: take a leave of absence to undergo sensitivity training and counseling, or face formal disciplinary action. Karen chose the former, knowing it might be her only chance to salvage her career and her conscience. As she packed up her desk for the indefinite break, emotions overwhelmed her. Shame weighed heavily on her shoulders, but beneath it lay a flicker of determination. She realized now that this wasn't just about saving her job. It was about becoming someone worthy of wearing the badge. On her last day before leave, Karen received a small package in the mail. Inside was a book titled Unpacking Bias, a guide to self-reflection, along with a handwritten note: "Growth starts with honesty. I believe you can change." There was no signature, but she immediately recognized Marcus's handwriting. Tears welled up in her eyes as she held the note, feeling a mix of gratitude and responsibility. This wasn't just a gift, it was a challenge. As Karen left the precinct that evening, she noticed protesters still gathered outside, chanting slogans and holding signs. Instead of looking away, she paused, taking in their words. Some glared at her, while others simply ignored her presence. But one young woman caught her attention, a teenager holding a sign that read, "We deserve better." Their eyes met briefly, and though no words were exchanged, Karen felt the weight of the message sink in. Driving home, Karen reflected on how far she had fallen, and how much work lay ahead. Redemption wouldn't come easily, but for the first time, she embraced the struggle. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she could choose to build a future defined by accountability and growth. And perhaps in time, she could prove to others, and to herself, that change was possible. Months passed, and Karen's journey of self-reflection began to bear fruit, not just in her personal life, but also within the precinct. When she returned from her leave of absence, she was a different person. Her colleagues noticed the shift immediately. Gone was the sharp-edged officer who relied on authority to command respect. In her place stood someone humbler, more thoughtful, and genuinely eager to listen. She started small, initiating conversations with community members during routine patrols instead of rushing through them. She asked questions about their concerns, listened to their frustrations, and worked alongside them to find solutions. At first, skepticism lingered among residents. Some eyed her warily, unsure if her newfound attitude was genuine or just an act. But Karen didn't let it discourage her. She showed up consistently, at block parties, school events, and neighborhood cleanups, proving through actions rather than words that she wanted to be part of the solution. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. One by one, people opened up to her, sharing stories they had once kept hidden out of fear or distrust. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his advocacy work, using his platform to push for systemic changes within law enforcement. He partnered with local organizations to host workshops on implicit bias and conflict resolution, inviting officers like Karen to participate. Though their interactions remained professional, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared commitment to creating a better future. Marcus often cited Karen's transformation as proof that individuals could grow when given the chance, inspiring others to believe in the possibility of change. The partnership between Diamond Tech Industries and the police department flourished under this new dynamic. With Marcus's guidance, the department implemented advanced technologies designed to improve transparency and accountability. Body cameras became mandatory, data collection systems tracked patterns of misconduct, and regular training sessions reinforced ethical practices. Officers learned not only how to de-escalate situations, but also how to recognize their own biases before they escalated into harm. Karen played a key role in these efforts, volunteering to lead discussions on difficult topics like racial profiling and privilege. At first, some officers resisted, dismissing the trainings as unnecessary or overly sensitive. But Karen persisted, drawing from her own experiences to make the lessons relatable. "I used to think I was immune to bias," she admitted during one session. "But then I realized, it's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to learn." Her honesty resonated with many, encouraging even the most skeptical officers to engage. Over time, the culture within the department began to shift. Conversations that were once avoided became commonplace, fostering an environment where mistakes could be acknowledged and addressed without fear of judgment. Outside the precinct, Karen's efforts rippled outward, inspiring similar initiatives in neighboring communities. News outlets highlighted her story as an example of redemption and growth, sparking national discussions about reform and reconciliation. Protesters who had once chanted slogans outside the station now attended town hall meetings, engaging in dialogue rather than confrontation. While tensions still existed, progress was undeniable, and it all started with one person choosing to take responsibility for their actions. For Karen, the road ahead wasn't without challenges. There were days when old habits crept back, moments when doubt threatened to undo her hard-earned progress. But each setback became an opportunity to reaffirm her commitment to change. She carried Marcus's note with her everywhere, pulling it out whenever she needed reminding of why she had started this journey in the first place. As the years went by, Karen rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a mentor to younger officers navigating their own struggles with bias and accountability. Her story served as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope, a reminder that no one was beyond redemption if they were willing to do the work. And though she never sought recognition for her efforts, Karen found fulfillment in knowing she had helped pave the way for a brighter, fairer future. For Marcus, seeing her transformation validated his belief in the power of education and empathy over punishment. Together, they proved that even in moments of conflict, bridges could be built and lives transformed when people chose understanding over division. Back at the precinct, Officer Karen Dawson sat slumped in her chair, staring blankly at her computer screen. The events of the traffic stop replayed over and over in her mind like a broken record. She could still feel the weight of Marcus's calm gaze boring into her as he drove away, leaving her standing there with his business card clutched tightly in her hand. It wasn't just embarrassment that gnawed at her. It was guilt mixed with fear. Guilt for letting her biases take control, and fear of what might happen if Marcus decided to make this incident public. Karen tried to shake it off, telling herself she had done nothing wrong. He reached into his pocket. She muttered under her breath, justifying her actions to herself. Anyone would have reacted the same way. But deep down, she knew better. Her training taught her to assess situations rationally, not jump to conclusions based on gut feelings or stereotypes. Yet today, she hadn't followed protocol. Today, she let something else guide her, an ugly mix of assumptions and prejudice she'd never wanted to confront. To distract herself, Karen opened up her email inbox, scrolling through unread messages until one caught her eye. The subject line read, "Mandatory Workplace Conduct Meeting, tomorrow morning." Attached was a flyer announcing a special presentation by Diamond Tech Industries, the tech company partnering with the police department to implement new safety technologies. At the bottom of the flyer was a photo of the presenter, Marcus Thompson, CEO. Karen's heart sank. She stared at the image, recognizing the same composed face from earlier that day. The man whose car she'd stopped, whose dignity she'd stripped away in front of bystanders, all while accusing him of wrongdoing without evidence, was now scheduled to address the entire precinct. How could this be happening? Panic bubbled inside her as she imagined facing him again, knowing full well he'd recognize her too. That night, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's disappointed expression, heard the murmurs of the crowd that had gathered during their encounter. She tossed and turned, wrestling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to write off the incident as a simple misunderstanding, a bad call made in the heat of the moment. Another part of her couldn't ignore the nagging voice in her head, whispering that this wasn't about Marcus at all. This was about her own biases, the ones she'd buried so deeply she didn't even realize they existed. The next morning, Karen arrived at the precinct early, hoping to avoid running into anyone before the meeting. As colleagues filed into the conference room, she kept her head down, pretending to review case files. When the clock struck 9, everyone quieted as Marcus walked in, dressed in another impeccably tailored suit. He carried himself with confidence, exuding authority without saying a word. Karen felt her stomach twist as he took his place at the podium. Marcus began his presentation with a warm smile, thanking the officers for their hard work and dedication to keeping the community safe. His words were polished yet genuine, striking a balance between professionalism and approachability. Karen listened intently, unable to tear her eyes away from him. Despite everything, she couldn't deny his charisma, or the fact that he seemed completely unaffected by their previous interaction. As Marcus spoke, Karen found herself reflecting on the irony of the situation. Here she was, sitting among her peers, forced to listen to a lecture on workplace conduct from the very person she treated unfairly just hours ago. Each slide he presented highlighted the importance of trust, communication, and mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they served. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had failed miserably at every principle he discussed. When the presentation ended, applause filled the room. Marcus thanked everyone once more before stepping down from the podium. Karen hesitated, unsure whether she should approach him or slip out unnoticed. Before she could decide, their eyes met across the crowded room. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Marcus gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of acknowledgement, but perhaps of understanding. It was enough to send a shiver down Karen's spine. Walking back to her desk later, Karen realized this wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a reckoning. Whether she liked it or not, Marcus Thompson had become a mirror reflecting her flaws, forcing her to confront the parts of herself she'd rather ignore. And now, she had no choice but to face them head-on. Karen's leave of absence began with a mix of dread and determination. For the first time in years, she found herself without the structure of her uniform or the routine of patrol duties. The emptiness of her days forced her to confront emotions she had long buried: shame, guilt, and fear. But it also gave her space to reflect, to peel back the layers of her own biases, and examine why she had acted the way she did. Her sensitivity training sessions were held in a small community center, led by a facilitator named Angela who specialized in helping law enforcement officers address implicit bias. At first, Karen resisted. She sat stiffly in her chair, arms crossed, convinced that she wasn't like those other cops who harbored overt racism. But Angela didn't push her. Instead, she asked questions that made Karen think deeply. "Why do you think certain people make you feel uneasy?" Angela asked during one session. "Is it their actions or your assumptions?" Karen hesitated, then admitted, "I guess. Sometimes I see someone and assume things before they even speak. Like if someone looks a certain way, I expect them to act a certain way. And what happens when those expectations aren't met?" Angela pressed gently. Karen thought about Marcus, the calm, composed man who had been nothing like the stereotype she'd imagined. "It throws me off," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to handle it." Angela nodded, encouraging her to dig deeper. Over weeks of these sessions, Karen began unraveling the tangled web of beliefs she hadn't realized she carried. She learned about systemic racism, microaggressions, and how even well-meaning individuals could perpetuate harm through unconscious biases. It was uncomfortable work, forcing her to face parts of herself she didn't want to acknowledge. But slowly, painfully, she started to change. Outside of training, Karen threw herself into reading books and watching documentaries recommended by Angela. One evening, as she read Unpacking Bias, Marcus's note tucked inside the cover caught her eye again. His words, "Growth starts with honesty. I believe you can change," felt like both a lifeline and a challenge. She realized now that Marcus had given her more than just a book. He had offered her hope. Hope that she could become better, not only for herself but for the community she served. As weeks turned into months, Karen began volunteering at local outreach programs aimed at building trust between police officers and marginalized communities. She attended town hall meetings, listening to residents share their stories of mistreatment and fear. Some spoke bitterly about encounters with law enforcement, while others expressed cautious optimism for reform. Karen listened intently, letting their voices wash over her, each story chipping away at the walls she had built around her heart. One night, after a particularly emotional meeting, an elderly woman approached Karen. Her name was Mrs. Lewis, and she introduced herself as a lifelong resident of the neighborhood where Karen worked. "You're not like the rest of them, are you?" Mrs. Lewis said softly, studying Karen's face. Karen shook her head, unsure of how to respond. "I'm trying not to be," she finally said. "But I've made mistakes. Big ones." Mrs. Lewis smiled faintly. "Mistakes can be fixed, child. What matters is whether you're willing to try." Those words stayed with Karen long after the meeting ended. They reminded her of Marcus's quiet strength, his refusal to let bitterness consume him. Inspired, Karen decided to write him a letter, a real one this time, not just a fleeting thought. In it, she thanked him for his patience and grace, admitting that his decision not to press charges had motivated her to seek growth. She ended the letter with a promise. "I won't stop working to be better, because people like you deserve better." When Marcus received the letter, he read it several times, touched by her sincerity. Though he still carried scars from their encounter, he recognized the effort behind her words. Redemption wasn't easy, but it was possible, and Karen was proving that every day. For Karen, the journey was far from over. She knew rebuilding trust would take time, and there would always be skeptics who doubted her intentions. But for the first time, she felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for the future of policing and the communities it served. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but with each step forward, she moved closer to becoming the officer she had always wanted to be. The next morning, whispers filled the precinct as news of Karen's traffic stop spread like wildfire. Someone had leaked the bystander video online, and it was already gaining traction on social media. Officers huddled around their phones, watching the clip that showed Karen shoving Marcus against his car. Comments ranged from shock to disbelief, with some defending her actions and others calling for accountability. For Karen, walking into the station felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew her darkest moment. Internal Affairs wasted no time launching an investigation. By midday, Karen found herself sitting in a small, sterile room with two investigators staring at her across a table. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. One investigator slid a copy of the incident report toward her, asking pointed questions about her decision-making during the stop. Karen struggled to explain herself without sounding defensive or guilty. "I thought he was reaching for something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It looked like a threat." "But Mr. Thompson complied with your instructions," one investigator countered, leaning forward. "He handed over his license and registration without resistance. Why escalate the situation?" Karen opened her mouth to respond but hesitated. How could she justify what she couldn't fully understand herself? She had reacted out of instinct, or so she told herself. But deep down, She knew her assumptions about Marcus were rooted in prejudice. Admitting that aloud, however, felt impossible. As the interrogation dragged on, Karen grew increasingly agitated. Back at her desk later, she avoided eye contact with her colleagues, feeling their judgment pressing down on her. Some gave her sympathetic looks, while others whispered behind her back. Meanwhile, Marcus faced pressure of his own. Calls poured into Diamond Tech Industries from reporters seeking comment, and his coworkers urged him to take legal action against Karen. But Marcus remained silent, weighing his options carefully. That evening, Karen decided to watch the leaked video herself. Sitting alone in her darkened apartment, she pressed play and watched as the camera captured her aggressive behavior. Seeing it from an outsider's perspective made her cringe. Her tone was sharp, her body language confrontational. Even worse, Marcus appeared calm and cooperative throughout, making her actions seem even more unjustified. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how poorly she had represented the badge she swore to uphold. Determined to salvage what little control she had left, Karen requested a private meeting with Marcus through official channels. To her surprise, he agreed. 2 days later, they met in a quiet conference room at Diamond Tech headquarters. Marcus arrived first, dressed in a tailored navy suit that exuded authority. When Karen walked in, her uniform feeling heavier than usual, he gestured for her to sit across from him. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Karen broke the silence. "Mr. Thompson, I want to start by saying, I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, betraying her vulnerability. "What I did was wrong, and I regret it deeply." Marcus studied her intently, his expression unreadable. After a pause, he responded, "Thank you for apologizing. That takes courage." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "But let me ask you something. Why did you react the way you did? Was it really because you thought I was dangerous, or was it something else?" Karen hesitated, her heart pounding. This was the question she had been dreading, the one that forced her to confront the ugly truth within herself. Taking a shaky breath, she admitted, "I don't know. Maybe I assumed things about you based on stereotypes, things I shouldn't have." Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "You're not the first person to treat me this way," he said quietly. "And unfortunately, you won't be the last. But what matters is whether you're willing to learn from this, to recognize those biases, and work to change them." His words struck a chord deep inside Karen. For years, she had prided herself on being fair and impartial, yet here she was, exposed as someone who had acted out of prejudice. It was humbling and painful, but also necessary. As the meeting ended, Marcus extended his hand, offering her a chance to rebuild trust. Karen shook it, vowing silently to do better, not just for herself, but for the community she served. Though the road ahead would be difficult, this conversation marked the beginning of a journey toward understanding and growth. And for the first time in days, Karen allowed herself a flicker of hope. The precinct buzzed with energy as officers mingled after Marcus Thompson's presentation. Some discussed the innovative technology Diamond Tech planned to introduce, while others commented on Marcus's polished demeanor and impressive credentials. Karen, however, stayed rooted in her seat, her hands clenched tightly around her pen. She felt out of place, like an actor who had forgotten her lines in the middle of a performance. Every laugh or compliment directed at Marcus made her shrink further into herself. Summoning what little courage she had left, Karen approached Marcus under the pretense of discussing the partnership details. "Mr. Thompson," she began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "thank you for your presentation. It was enlightening." Marcus turned to face her, his expression neutral but polite. For a moment, he simply studied her, as if trying to place where he'd seen her before. Then recognition flickered in his eyes. His lips parted slightly, but instead of saying anything confrontational, he nodded slowly. "Officer Dawson, right?" he said, his tone calm and measured. "I appreciate your attendance today." Karen swallowed hard, caught off guard by his composure. She had expected anger, frustration, maybe even sarcasm, but not this quiet acknowledgement. Her mind scrambled for words, anything to fill the awkward silence stretching between them. "Yes, that's me," she stammered. "I just wanted to say, I think this partnership is going to be great for our department." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made Karen feel exposed. "I hope so," he replied evenly. "Collaboration between law enforcement and communities is key to progress. Trust has to go both ways, doesn't it?" His words hit Karen like a punch to the gut. They weren't accusatory, but they carried weight, enough to make her shift uncomfortably. She forced another weak smile and excused herself, claiming she needed to get back to work. As she walked away, she could feel his gaze lingering on her, weighing her down more than any physical shove ever could. Later that night, Karen sat alone in her dimly lit living room, staring at the business card Marcus had unknowingly dropped during their encounter. The gold lettering gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Marcus Thompson, CEO of Diamond Tech Industries. Each word seemed to mock her now, a reminder of how wrong she had been to assume he was anything less than who he truly was. She replayed their brief conversation in her mind, dissecting every syllable Marcus had spoken. There was no malice in his tone, no hint of revenge or retaliation. If anything, he had treated her with the same courtesy he extended to everyone else. But that civility unsettled her more than hostility would have. It forced her to confront the truth about her own behavior and the biases she had let dictate her actions. Karen leaned back against the couch, covering her face with her hands. Memories of the traffic stop flooded her thoughts again. The way Marcus had remained calm despite her aggression, the disappointment in his eyes when she shoved him against his car, the patience he showed even as she accused him unjustly. He hadn't fought back or raised his voice. He had simply endured it, maintaining his dignity throughout. What kind of person does that? Karen wondered. Someone secure in their identity, she realized. Someone who didn't need to prove themselves because they already knew their worth. And then there was her, reactive, defensive, quick to judge based on appearances rather than facts. The contrast between them was glaring, and it left her feeling smaller than she ever had before. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a group chat from fellow officers, sharing memes and jokes about the day's events. Normally, Karen would have joined in, laughing along to lighten the mood. But tonight, the messages felt hollow, almost offensive. How could they joke around when she had spent hours grappling with shame and regret? As the clock ticked past midnight, Karen finally admitted something she had avoided all evening. Marcus wasn't the problem. She was. He represented everything she claimed to value in her profession: integrity, respect, fairness. But somehow, she had failed to extend those same principles to him. Now, standing on the precipice of accountability, she had two choices: double down on denial or take responsibility for her actions. Either path would change her life forever, but only one offered the possibility of redemption. For the first time, Karen considered what it might mean to truly apologize, not just with words, but with actions. Could she face Marcus again and admit her mistakes? More importantly, would he even listen?